This episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast is brought to you by Nomadicare. Now, personally, I love Nomadicare. I've used Nomadicare, and I recommend the company to all new travelers. What Nomadicare does is it takes the fear out of getting set up with a bad recruiter, which is the biggest fear that you have jumping into this journey. So they sit down, they interview recruiters, they vet them, get them on a list, and then provide them to you as a free service, as a free recruiter matchmaking service in order to get you started on your journey. Now, usually you only get 2 recruiters going through Nomadicare, but being a listener of the show, you can get 3. So this is how it's going to work. You go to nomadicare.com/Dylan. You will get set up with 3 recruiters to be on your dream team, as well as a guide to get you started on your journey.
The second sponsor of the show is TravCon, the Travelers Conference. I'm super excited to announce them as a sponsor of the show. TravCon was there for me before I got started as a medical nomad, and now I'm actually involved with the planning of the event. So super aligned, super congruent. I've been promoting them before they were even a sponsor, and so I'm excited to have them on. So there are 3 main reasons that you should go to TravCon this year. Number 1, value. This is the cheapest conference to go to as a medical professional, and also the only place that I've ever felt like royalty when you're walking in and all these staffing agencies and all these recruiters want to talk to you, and you're bumping elbows with these travelers and they're interested about your story, about where you're coming from and what you're doing, and it's overall just a really good feel-good event. Number 2 is education and growth. So this conference was founded on the realization that there's a lot to know to be a medical traveler, to be a medical nomad. And so this is where you go to get the most updated tax information. This is where you go for those really niche specific questions on what's it like to travel in an RV and what's it like to travel to Hawaii. And then third, community. This is where a lot of my traveler friends that are very near and dear to my heart right now, this is where we met. So this is where the relationship sparked. It's also one of the only places that you get to go to and see the leaders and meet the leaders of the industry, both on the staffing agency side and on the traveler side, and also get to meet your recruiters face to face that you've been working with. So TravCon is always in September every year. TravCon is also always in Las Vegas. The link is going to be in the show notes for you to get your ticket. I'll be at TravCon. All my friends will be at TravCon. I hope to see you there.
Dr. Steven Stockhausen, where are you at in the world right now?
Vallejo, California.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the New Medical Nomads podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Dylan Collier, and we are on the last episode of the negotiation series here with Dr. Steven Stockhausen. And this last one's going to be about the actual negotiation. So we've talked about being valuable, how to increase your value, communicating that value, which is a very unique skill for us as clinicians, and now negotiating that value or getting paid for that value. And so, oh man, I didn't have one prepared for a dad joke for this one, but
yeah.
Man, if buckle in because we're about to drive it home, I guess. But
There you go, that works. That works.
All right, Steve, I've kind of given my over the past, I don't know how many episodes it was. I went hard on this negotiation topic, and really what sparked it was there's some individuals out there kind of giving some false information. Originally, when I was coming into this travel industry, it seemed like travelers were getting taken advantage of, and you need to be really hard and aggressive and assertive and stuff like that. And I realized that's how to best burn bridges between you and recruiters, and that this is really built on relationships. Mm-hmm. And to have a successful career, you need to have strong relationships, and how to do that. But again, knowing boundaries, knowing that, okay, I don't have to be greedy. I don't have to be that shark coming to the table. But I also don't have to be hosed. Yeah. There are some individuals out there saying, got to go hard, like put recruiters against each other, and blah, 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 blah. And so it sparked this whole series. And so I've went quite into it, but I've also kind of given a brief overview of kind of what that, I guess, typical flow would be for submitting for a job, interviewing, and then negotiations. But can you give the listeners just an idea of what that kind of looks like for you and Ellen?
The whole flow, is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically to backtrack even further, the number one most important thing before negotiation, before you ever find a job, is finding a recruiter that you trust and you feel like you can work with in a professional setting. There's a lot of really nice guys and girls who are recruiters who they're not the best ones to work with professionally. So we're not looking for your best friend. We're looking for someone that you feel like you can trust, you can work with, and build a professional rapport with. So that's the basement that we're going to build this foundation, and go up from there on. So you got to have that first. And then, what we do, because it's two of us, it's a little bit more of a challenge to find jobs. We're both physical therapists, both travel together. We need to find jobs pretty much in the same town, or at least within a reasonable commute from each other. So one thing we found is that a lot of recruiters don't know their geography very well. So we just tell them, can you just send us a list of the jobs of such and such a setting, or whatever in this geographic region. So in the entire state of California or the entire state of Colorado or whatever it happens to be, they send us a list of jobs, and then we will Google Maps each city and go through, and that one's kind of close to this one. And we do our research from there. Once we decide on jobs, then we ask them to submit us with the resume, which you've already talked about in prior episodes. You do the interview, hopefully all goes well. Then you hopefully get a phone call from your recruiter saying, hey, they offered you the position. Here's the pay package. What do you want to do? And then that for us is when the negotiation sort of begins. Although if you listen to the last episode, you'll know that it's all set up by how well you interviewed. And that if you're going into a permanent job, that right there is the same thing as the negotiation. Because if you can present yourself as being super duper valuable, that makes the negotiation part a breeze. And so if the clinic that you just interviewed at, even if you're not doing perm, if you're doing travel, is super stoked to have you, they're going to put a little bit of pressure on their account rep or whoever it is on the back end. For those of you who don't know how travel contracts work, for a lot of agencies, most agencies, I believe you'd probably know better than I do, Dylan. Most agencies have an account rep that is facing the clinic, and then there's a recruiter that is facing the clinician.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep, that's correct.
So the better you interview, that account rep is going to be hearing how stoked that clinic is about you coming. And that's all in your favor. And then you have to go then negotiate with your recruiter on the final pay package.
Got it. There was a couple things that you had said that I want to dive in a little bit. In order to, I'll discuss the experience that I had when I was trying to mediate a situation between a traveler and a recruiter. And so if you need to have that relationship with that recruiter first before you ask for a list of jobs from that recruiter. If you had just met them and you're not being agreeable to get on the phone with them, and you were just asking for them to send a list of jobs, that recruiter is going to feel like you're just looking for jobs, that you already have this other recruiter that you're working for, and that you're going to potentially, steal their clients or something like that. Because these facilities are the more rare parts of this balance. So you have the staffing agency in the middle, you have travelers on one side, you have the hospital on the other. Hospitals are more rare than travelers. That's why when situations come up, staffing agencies are kind of incentivized to try and keep the hospital happy more so than the traveler. So there's something to keep in mind. Again, travelers cancel on hospitals way more than hospitals cancel on travelers. So just keep that in mind. Although they're incentivized many times, that the staffing agency will be there for you if you are a stud clinician, if you are in the right, acting appropriately, things like that. There's been some situations where I'm just like, wow, how do these individuals, how are you in charge of anybody's care for some of these things? But you need to have that relationship with the recruiter first before you ask for that list of jobs. That way they trust you. You're not going to put them against another recruiter, or you're not going to send that list over to another recruiter and say, hey, what can you do with this? Or do you have access to this? Because I don't want to fill out the resume or whatever it might be. That's how you get kind of dinged on their side to, DNA, do not reach out. Don't work with this individual. Yeah.
Well, that takes us, the next step is just finding, this is kind of covering like everything travel now, but the best way of finding, a recruiter is going through some sort of avenue of a referral through either a friend. There's plenty of us, I'm a blogger. I have the recruiters that I like, if you ask Dylan has the people he likes. We all have our favorites. but to be honest, that's the best route to really go for most people, is because if, that's someone who's had a personal experience with that client. If you're asking someone who's actually worked with that person before, you kind of have to do your research as well from your source. Cause there are people, oh my goodness, don't get me started on Facebook. There's tons of people on Facebook who are passing out referrals who have never worked with any of these people themselves, or they don't even travel, period. So just keep an eye out for them. But, ask a friend, ask someone who's in the travel agents, travel business themselves. If you need to, you can ask, someone like us, but, that's the best way to kind of get a jump start, versus that blast email that, how many hundreds of people are getting that email just like you, at a job that may or may not exist. You need to have a trusted source that you can go to. So I definitely recommend, talking to a buddy who's a fellow traveler and say, hey, who do you recommend? Who are some people I should at least get the ball rolling with and see if they work out for you? So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's that strong relationship, again, for the previous episodes, trying to come and become their number one favorite traveler. So that's going to look like exactly what you expect out of a great recruiter. Are they reaching out weekly? Are you actually interested in, what they're doing on the weekends? Are you talking about their kids? Are you talking about books or whatever music that you guys connect on? Just being, friendly. But again, it's professional, it's business. So there's a line there, but you can absolutely develop a relationship with that person, so that when they have that VIP contract come up, or they know exactly where you're looking at and it pops up, and you are the first person that they think about. Going back to, you just had the interview, they want you, they're putting pressure on that account manager. For those travelers out there, usually the recruiter of a staffing agency is the only person you will ever talk to. Maybe if you have issues come up with payroll, they'll forward you to the correct person, but almost always the recruiter is your point of contact. Same thing goes for the facility, or for the hospital. They have their own contact person within the staffing agency. Sometimes this is different between companies. Some of the originals, the account managers and the recruiters were the same person, so they were playing both sides of the coin. But nowadays, you almost have the customer service side of the recruiter, which is also kind of marketing and sales. And then you have the account manager, which is on the hospital side. So you did a great job on the interview. They are like, Dr. Stockhausen's a stud. We want him. We're, willing, or what does it take? Like whatever. They might not even be pitching out more money now, but they're like, yes, we want this. We want this PT. When that happens, you now have leverage for the negotiation, which is important. And that's where a lot of these, for the persons that are kind of sharks and they go really, really, really aggressive, that when they go into these negotiations, that's when they know that they're wanted, that's when they really press hard. But if you've already talked about the range, it's in the ballpark, whatever terminology you might use, you now have a little bit of leverage because you know that they want you. So definitely use that to your advantage. And it's always a great time to ask for if there's more wiggle room in the payment for them to do so. But Steve, when you are opening up that conversation, how do you kind of open it up when that recruiter calls you and says, hey, they just offered you the position? How do you open that conversation up?
So you touched on it, briefly, that we talk about, we don't take an interview. We don't even get submitted to a job unless it's within a ballpark range of, what my wife and I think we need to make per week, because that's how we kind of set the ground rules of discussing money, is per week after tax. That's just how we like to talk about it. And that's sort of the terminology we use with every recruiter that we work with going forward. Which has bit us once, because we almost took a job, and we had a recruiter from an agency we obviously never will work with again, tried to do the old switcheroo, net versus gross on us at the last minute. We'd actually already interviewed and it went great, and we thought we were going to be making, I think it was like a $300 a week swing, which was a big deal. So anyways, you set all those ground rules, and then, going into it, I don't even interview if it's not within the ballpark of, what I think is reasonable. And for us, a ballpark, might be, I don't know, $150 a week after tax, range, around there. And maybe a little bit more if we're planning on using one of these little sort of negotiation tactics that I'll talk about here in a second. We might even expand that range up to $200 or more, to be honest. But if it's within like $100, $150 a week, then we take the interview. If it goes well, we talk to the recruiter. Hey, this is sort of where we need to be. I'm really interested in the job. It went well, but to make us really comfortable, we'd like we need to make X, Y, and Z dollar amount. And so that's sort of how we start it.
That's great.
Yeah.
I do the same thing with using that term to make me more comfortable. When you're talking about, this came up on the interview, wasn't really expecting this. It's going to take me a little bit more time, or I'm going to have to do a little bit more research before I show up to the job, or whatever it might be. There's some extra effort that's going to be on my end, and to make me a little bit more comfortable. Is there any wiggle room that we can do for the amount that we're earning?
Mm-hmm.
When you open up these conversations and you're getting into this, how often have you had the facility actually come back and change the bill rate?
Twice.
Twice. Okay.
Yeah. So I talked about I believe it was in the last podcast, we talked about how I hit a home run with the interview, did really good job with it, fortunately. And, they offered another $1 on the bill rate, which is definitely helpful. And then actually at the current position we're at, they raised it as well because they wanted it to keep us around for a little while. So
got it.
And we had prior to this particular contract, we had done a pretty long contract with them as well. They knew that we were curious and coming back. They had a real big need, more desperate than they thought they were going to be. And, and so, we'd always, no matter if we're going back to a contract or not, we always ask our recruiter, hey, is there a way we can make a little bit more? At this point, we worked with these recruiters for years now. We've been going on I think we're in our 6th year now as travelers, period. So we have a long-standing relationship with 2 of the recruiters that we use. It's super long. And so they know, and they know to ask every time. And so for this particular time, it never hurts to ask. And that's one of the things that a lot of PTs got to get comfortable with, or anyone in healthcare needs to get comfortable with, talking about money. And there is nothing lost by them saying no. Like, I've already been offered the job. Worst case scenario is I make whatever amount it was that they pitched me before. They're not going to go lower because I asked for more money. You're not going to lose anything by asking. You can only gain by asking. And that's for me, that was a huge mental shift because I'm not one who really likes to even ask for help for anything. My wife definitely, my wife's so classic. We'll go on a trail run. I'll look back and she's a quarter mile behind me because she won't even ask for me to slow down. Like she definitely won't ask for more, doesn't feel comfortable asking for more money. So it took a long time for us to get comfortable saying, hey, we would like to make more. Is there more wiggle room in this contract? And, for us, we were able to have that bill rate bumped up for this particular job, which was out of the blue. We did not expect it this time.
Got it.
Yeah. So not very often, to be honest. The clinic has not very frequently raised it.
Yeah. I wanted to bring that point up because I think that was a misconception I had coming in, is that the facility would actually raise. And it's not unheard of, but it is rare for that to happen. And typically when that does happen, it's going to be a smaller facility. So for nurses and techs, if you're working at a hospital, these big systems, likely not going to increase the bill rate. If you have these smaller home health, outpatient, whatever it might be, they tend to be a little bit more lax and not have so stringent budgets or many people to go through for check marks on getting things passed. And something that an inappropriate fear that I had was I was worried if I would ask for more money, they would take the offer away. And it's just it makes no sense. But I'm sure some of the listeners kind of feel that way, that, if I come across, entitled, they're just going to be like, oh no, whatever, we got somebody else, we'll just go with them. Like, if you ask for more and they say no, you're still at the same spot. So absolutely 100%, there's not a negative reason to not ask. especially if you're doing it in a conversational way. Yes, this was in ballpark. I'd feel more comfortable if, and is there any more wiggle room? So I think that's a really, really great way to have that conversation, to kind of get used to it, get rid of that fear. They're not going to take it away.
Yeah. And, if you have a dollar amount coming into this whole thing that you really want to see, I recommend writing that thing down so you can see it before you get on the phone with your recruiter, saying this is the amount that you want to make. And, the power of, this is a little bit of a tactic or a tip. The power of the if-then statement is very, very, very strong. And if a recruiter hears you say, if I can make this, then I will sign today. And that's the way I phrase it. If I can make this, I will sign right now. And even if that's stretching them a little bit, to know that you are in their hands. If they don't have to negotiate anymore. If they come up to your dollar amount, that's a great way to make the amount of money that you know that you need to make. Sure, there's a small chance you could be leaving a little bit more on the table, but if you're making your amount that you wrote down, what does it matter? If you're happy and you're beating the goals that you need to meet, that's the right amount of money for you to make. So the if-then statement has been fantastic for us as far as a little tactic.
Yeah. And for those listening, this goes for not just negotiations for your contracts, but negotiations for housing. Pretty much any negotiations moving forward. Those tactics or phrases or things that carry over, and it's not just within this small, minute little niche that we have. And I think it's so cool that we, if you're traveling full time, what is it, out of the year, like 46 weeks, if you're going home, maintaining your tax residence, things like that, you can take 3 to 4 contracts in a year. That's 3 to 4 times that you get to practice this skill, which is much more than the average clinician who might change hospitals 2 or 3 times in their career. And that's it, other than buying a vehicle or maybe making mortgage payments on houses. Like that's the only experience they get. And so this is a really cool way in order to get comfortable around money and get experience with how people respond and come back to you with certain phrases, counter offers. Or my favorite thing, when somebody says, "Oh, that'll never happen, so we don't need to put it in the contract," like for housing. You will hear that so often. It makes no sense. It's like, you're so confident about it, why don't you put it in the contract? Oh,
yep.
How many times have you asked if there was more money or anything more that could be thrown your way, and there wasn't any higher amount that they could give?
I honestly don't. I don't know. Well, and here's part of the reason is, one of the things I was alluding to before, one of our sort of, it's become sort of like a tactic, I guess you could say, is, making yourself more lucrative, not just to your clinic, but then also to your recruiter. And my wife and I, we also have 2 dogs, and now we have a kid, 2-year-old. So, moving every 3 months is, I can't even imagine moving every 3 months at this point with all of our, you can see right behind me, I'm laying on the floor next to a crib. Like, we still have boxes in the corner over here. I mean, it's hard for us to make moves, big moves like that. So we generally take longer contracts. That is gold to your recruiting agency, because that's a job that they don't have to spend money marketing, and they don't have to spend man hours trying to fill. And it's guaranteed that it stays in-house, that there's not the chance that another recruiting agency is going to slide in and fill that position. So because we take these longer contracts, almost always we can bump up from that original dollar amount. And that's sort of where I was alluding to before. We've made, upwards of $200 a week more, because we said, what if we stay for 6 months? What if we stay for 9 months? What if we stay for a year? What can you do then? And then throwing that ball into their court and saying, and then kind of, standing up for what you need to make. And again, you have your little number that you think you want to make. But that's the best tactic. It's technically, there's a negotiation book, I believe it's called Getting to Yes. That is, they call it expanding the pie, is the phrase that they use. So if you can find a way where, everyone's always battling for their piece of the pie, But if you can make the whole pie bigger, then all of us win.
Mhm.
And so in this case, your clinic fills the role for longer, and it's expensive for clinics to go without clinicians. If your company can fill the role longer, it stays in-house. It's making them money with, that they weren't going to necessarily before. And then you can make a little bit more. So that's a great way everybody can win if you can offer that. But one of the little bits of the tactic is you offer it after the initial interview, and because then they're expecting you to only be there 3 months, and then you're all of a sudden, poof, this is so much greater, works really, really well. So we haven't done a 3-month. My wife has done 1 3-month contract, and I think I've only the shortest I've done is 5. It was an odd one, but yeah.
Okay.
So we've always been able to negotiate a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah. That was my next question, is how often does it increase when you do negotiate? And just for those travelers out there who are listening now can get the experience of somebody who's been in it for 6+ years.
Yeah.
And knowing like what the odds are of if it's really worth to get out of your comfort zone and ask if there is any more.
For sure.
That's awesome. What are some tips that you would have for nomads for those negotiations?
Well, using that expanding the pie, if then statement, those are two definite ones. Goodness, I was trying to think. I had another one in my head. Right, if you hadn't asked me, I could have just told you. Just using the word because, and there's a bunch of super cool studies on this. Actually, Don, I think you're somewhat familiar with it. But to boil it all down, some researchers basically did a little study of somebody asking to ditch the line at a college copy machine when they had to make copies, and they tested 3 different phrases. One was just asking to ditch. One was ditching and saying because they had a real reason, and then the other one was saying because and a fake reason. And they almost doubled their success by giving the word because, whether it was a real reason or a fake reason, it didn't matter. Just having the word because, the person was more likely to agree to it. So if you can come into this negotiation and say, hey, I need to make, $100 a week more because I have some medical bills I wasn't planning on, or because I'm really trying to hammer these loans a little faster during this contract than I anticipated. Whatever it happens to be, just using that phrase, it justifies it, and people are way more likely to be agreeable. So that's a little hack, I guess you could say. I don't know how much of a tip or a tactic that is, but
well, I think a lot of the communication pieces are important. I'll let you finish your thought though before I jump into that study.
That was it. There was another one I was trying to think of, and I've lost it. So if I remember, I'll interrupt.
Yeah. So I think they redid that study. I wasn't aware of that one, but there was one where there's a line in front of a copy machine, and they had participants go up and ask if they can cut to the front of the line. And so first person went up and said,
is that the example I just gave?
Is it? I thought you said ditch. Yeah.
Ditch. Yeah. Ditch the line. Isn't that?
Oh, ditch the line. Oh, I thought it, I used the term cut the line.
Oh, no, sorry. It must be an Ohio thing.
Got it.
Yeah. Ditching is the same. Yeah. Ditching is the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. So it's the same study, but yeah, the way I remembered it, it wasn't a fake reason, but it was like it wasn't even a reason. It was, can I cut the line because I need to make copies? Like everybody needs to make copies. Yep. Can I cut the line because I need copies? And just because they were percentage more allowed to cut inside the line, even if it was just like nonsense.
Yeah. It was crazy.
That was a great study though. Did that other point come back to you?
Nope. Not at all. Sorry.
All good. It'll be in the course. We'll hit on that at the end. Yeah. Is there any parts in here that kind of reflecting back for those travelers that will eventually go perm that would really be different between negotiation for a travel contract versus negotiation for a perm contract?
I think you have a little bit more wiggle room, doing your benefits package, depending on the type of setting that you're going into. You could probably wiggle a little bit more there. And then, time off, money for CEUs, that kind of stuff. There's a little bit more, I feel like, in the whole benefits package that for the perm person, you can tweak more, if you find your own insurance versus going with your company's insurance, stuff like that. You can do a little bit of that with traveling. Like I know you personally do a little bit more with your own insurance versus your company's insurance. I'm sure you've talked about that. Mm-hmm. But we might get interrupted by a 2-year-old again. The handle on the door is trying to turn. She can barely reach it. Anyways, so that's one of the main things. And then as far as, if you're planning to take a perm job, you might have a little bit more wiggle room as far as down the road. So setting yourself up for the rest of your career. One of the things that comes up, at least for me, is your leadership positions and taking and non-traditional roles within the clinic. So we actually got pitched. We meant to talk about this on our site. We haven't yet, so you're going to get a little bit of a scoop. But we got pitched jobs, perm jobs that were paying a lot, over 6 figures, to stay. I think they're perm if they consider us perm over a year, and they want us to. They're paying really good. It's like, I don't know, $120K a year or so. I mean, pretty good for being a staff therapist. And then I simply told them, if I'm going to be there that long, I want to build my skills. And so is there any other responsibilities that I can take on, additional leadership or otherwise? And the gentleman goes, well, how many years of experience do you have again? And, I told him I've been out since 11. And he goes, oh, well, we have clinicians who have twice that much experience and they're not in leadership. So I have to ask them first. And right there, that was enough for me to not take the job, because I'm a big believer that years of experience does not equal skill set. And this guy, valued, and maybe it's a company thing, maybe it's not just him, but they valued seniority over, the fact that I'd run a clinic already by myself meant nothing to him, and the fact that I've been a teacher and I've done marketing now with 3 different companies meant nothing, and right there, that was enough for me to not be interested. But that was a negotiation point that they didn't wiggle on, and was the driver for me not to want to take the job, and that's a lot of money for perm jobs. That's really good, especially for just being a staff clinician at an outpatient setting. Like 120 a year that's a lot. Like, and of course we kept the bridge there. We didn't burn a bridge with it. I kept it as congenial as possible, but we didn't accept in the long run. And that was the driver for us. So there's other things that you can negotiate with these perm positions that you might not be able to do as simply with a traveler, that will benefit you down the road as a clinician. So
definitely. I think, bringing up that point, I do believe there is more, I guess, creativity that could go into when you talked about expanding the pie. I don't think the pie is just financial. I think the pie can be, whatever you find valuable. If it is time off, maybe, if they're agreeable to, you're coming out of travel and you're really dreading just 2 weeks off a year because you've been used to a month or whatever it might be, being able to negotiate more time off.
Yeah.
Or you're not even get paid for that. Yeah.
Unpaid time off.
That's still huge, flexible benefit that you can go for. Or if there is something you're interested in, the CEUs are another kind of obvious one. But if there's something you're super interested in, I'm trying to think of like outside the box. If you're really into yoga and you're like, I want to have my, my own like little side thing going on, and I want to have these programs for these older individuals to come in. Can I use your clinic in the after hours for this, or whatever it might be? Just get creative and see what you can do in order to expand that pie. It doesn't just have to be financial.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely.
All right. Any last points that you want to bring up as we're kind of closing this conversation down?
Not really. Kind of touching back on what we mentioned in the prior episode in the interview is just coming off confident, knowing that you're valuable, being able to stick to it. And, I can't hammer home enough. You have to have that number written down that you need to make. You need to beforehand do your research on what your family can handle, and know that amount, and stick to it. And don't don't wiggle. You know, my wife and I, one of our first times we were trying to go to Hawaii, this is before we had the whole, you know, posse that we travel with now. And it literally came down to like less than $1 an hour. But they couldn't meet, they wouldn't agree on, I think it was like 72 or 73 cents an hour less than what our minimum amount was. And our minimum amount was, because we had student loans still at the time, we had to make that payment. And we said that that was where our values were. Student loans were number one, even more than going to Hawaii. And so we turned the position down for like 73 cents an hour difference. And, you know, some people will think we're crazy, but, you know, we end up being debt free in 3 years because of travel, $250,000 in debt pretty much to 3 years, and it's gone. Like, how else are you going to do this if you don't stick to your guns at some point? So, you know, that's one thing that I would definitely stress is be confident and have your number written down that you know you need to make to be comfortable and meet your goals, and then stick to it and have that confidence in yourself and what you can provide that clinic or that hospital or whatever it happens to be.
That's awesome. I do have 2 or maybe 3 last questions here. Do you have any other books that you would recommend? I know you talked about Getting to Yes, and I know that was that's a staple for those that haven't read it or heard of it. It's a it's a seasoned book. A lot of people will go back to it, whether you're in the marketing space, sales space, whatever. It is very, very respected book. So that is a good one to check out. But do you have any others on the top of your head?
Yeah, there's a few. There's really anything by Robert Cialdini. You know, he does Influence is his classic. And then he has one of his more recent ones is Pre-Suasion. And there's a new one. I haven't even read it yet. I think it's just 50 Scientific Ways. Let me grab it. I'll just give him a little pitch. Oh, it's called Yes. 50 scientifically proven ways to be persuasive. But he is a co-author on it, and you know, anything that he does is fantastic. He does a ton of research on influence, which is simply what negotiation is. It's, you know, all of it is influencing any conversation. You can use a lot of this stuff with your clients, at least in physical therapy. You know, sometimes we have a hard time persuading people to do their home exercise program. And if you can use some of these different ways to, you know, talk to people and persuade them. And we're not talking in a malicious way, because a lot of people think it's, you know, being persuaded or influenced sounds malicious, like, you know, last election or something like that. We're not talking like that. You know, if you're using it for good reasons, like, you know, it's all ethically sound. So anything by him. And then there's another book called Influence. I don't remember the author. I think it's something Levine. It's also fantastic. And so they all go into the same sort of research studies talking about negotiation tactics and how people are persuaded to do certain things and why the, you know, buy now button works so well. And, you know, the little sort of the invisible things that make us make these decisions that we didn't necessarily think, you know, we would make that purchase or we didn't think we'd be influenced by. It's kind of surprising. It's really, really eye-opening, because every single one of us says, oh, that doesn't work on me. It actually does. You know, all of it does. We're all helpless to a lot of these things. And it's pretty neat. So I recommend any of those books. I wish I would have read them before I bought my last car. You know, it's one of those things. Like, my wife and I bought our first car, months after we got married, and got hosed. And I read this book years later, and I'm like, oh, he did this, and then he did this, and then he did this, and yeah. So it's all good stuff.
Yeah. Influence is a book that I recommend any clinician to read, whether you're getting into just now, you know, graduating school, whatever it might be. It is originally a psychology book that marketing and sales really picked up and started consuming, but it goes into all these really neat studies of how people are influenced, whether it's there's like 6 main principles. There's like authority and reciprocity. And the one study that sticks out to me is this reciprocity, where they had, I think, these little girls that belong to a religious organization walking up and handing out flowers or whatever it might be. And they hand them these flowers, and then they ask them for a donation. And people were so hard to say no to that one, they would pay the donation, 2, they would throw the flower away because it didn't mean anything to them. But eventually they had to make it illegal within that airport or within that city or within that state, whatever it might be, because people couldn't say no to this act of reciprocity, which means like, I give you something, you can give something back. It's that natural feeling. And so it is such a great book for anybody who's in clinical care, not even just talking about negotiations, but when you're talking to patients about how you are going to influence them to make the best decisions for themselves, for their healthcare. I think it's such a huge, huge book for any clinician. So I absolutely recommend that. I haven't heard Pre-Suasion, or I've heard of it. Didn't know it was by the same guy. Definitely gonna have to read that now. And then the new book too. I'm excited for that one.
Yeah.
What's something that you have bought that has been very valuable on your travels?
Oof. That's a tricky one. We travel, we generally do unfurnished apartments. And so I would say my wife and I actually have this Cadillac of camping mattresses that we love it so much. It's our primary mattress. We toss it on the floor, and we don't even bother getting a bed at every contract we go to. We'll buy used furniture, and we kind of do the furniture flip and all that. But man, this ExPed camping mattress it's about 4 inches thick. It's awesome. It's a little pricey, but it's been price per use, obviously, is fantastic.
That's so this is a similar question that I used to ask, and it used to be, how did I word it? Because you find like the more that you ask these questions that the answers are different. So if I said, I think I used to say something you bought that you couldn't travel without, I would get answers like, there's nothing I couldn't travel without my toothbrush or something like that. But now I'm trying to rephrase it, but this was, you gave the same the same answer in our podcast episode way back when, for you and Ellen with with the pad. And Ellen was she using it at like 7 months pregnant or something like that. And it was her favorite mattress to use. And so, it's been on my wish list for a while. So whenever I decide to finally go for a place that's unfurnished, that is the first thing I'm going to buy. And then last question, especially since you've been traveling with the whole family now, what is your favorite travel story?
Oh my goodness, that's really hard, man.
Top 5. Let's change the question. Your top 5 favorite travel stories.
I mean, we did some salmon fishing up in Alaska, and we're in a big line of all these people, just like out of the National Geographic's whole line of people, shoulder to shoulder fishing, fly fishing for salmon. And all of a sudden you start hearing bear, 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 and a grizzly bear comes down and literally stands where my wife was fishing picks out the fish that she was fishing, because we were fishing for red salmon, and they kind of sit there for a little while, and literally it's the fish that she was trying to catch, and it just reaches down, grabs it, takes off with the thing. We have a before and after, and she is in the exact same spot as this bear. That was super cool. I don't know, man. We did a traveler's Christmas all together, camping on Big Sur. A bunch of travelers were too far away from home to go back, so we all did Christmas together. We cooked a ham on the grill at the campsite. That was a lot of fun. Being able to share all this with our daughter. We were in Yosemite 2 weeks ago, and she said her first 3-word sentence. We're driving around, and we'd already done a big hike, and she goes, "This is fun. This is fun." And just, oh man, it's great. That's 3, but I could go on forever. There's nothing, all the time off. We took 3 months off this summer that we never, ever could have done. My wife was able to hike the John Muir Trail, which is, take weeks to do. We never could have done any of this stuff without being travelers. So it's the best. We love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll be very hard for when that position does come up. It's starting to freeze a little bit, but I think it is going to be very hard to switch from travel to perm, and I'm hoping to do an episode of somebody going through that so they can talk about kind of that experience of having all this freedom and then potentially not having all this freedom all of a sudden. But I know travelers out there who usually stop, 2 to 3 years, you start craving community. It just gets, the veteran travelers like you and Ellen, even without the families, typically start taking longer and longer contracts. One, I think it addresses that community want, and two, you're just not packing as much because packing is awful. But all right,
you're a little bit breaking up on that.
Yeah, I think I'm lagging too. All right, well, we will wrap it up here. Steve, thank you so much for coming on. You were there for me when I was kind of first coming on and helping me out with this negotiation stuff. So I'm glad to have you on for this talk. For those listeners, if you are listening now, you can find Steve and Ellen's content at ptadventures.com. There's a lot of great info and great quality articles there. And so it is very, very quality driven. And that's what I appreciate most about them. Each of them, it's not just a post. It's not just to get the content out there. It is a quality piece of information. So it's so great. Each has a purpose for being written. Also, Steve does have a course that I went through, and a lot of these psychological things that we talked about, communication phrases, things like that. If you want a full course on that to dive in deep, this is the one to take. And that link will be down in the show notes. I think it was ptadventures.thinkific.com. But those links will be down for those interested to check it out. It can absolutely change your life if you're talking about these monies and getting comfortable with negotiations and things like that. And Steve, did you had somebody come through that took the course and then had an outstanding impact on their job? Is that right?
Yeah. We've had, I think you're asking about the course and how people have been doing with it. It's been pretty fantastic. So we've had a lot of positive feedback from both travelers, and we also have a kind of a sister course for perm people. And we had some pretty fantastic results, especially from the perm, to be honest. I think a lot of people aren't comfortable with doing negotiation quite as often as travelers might be. It was a bigger push for them to learn these things and to be able to take advantage of them. And I guess they were able to get a whole bunch more time off, as well as a little bit of a boost, because they were able to see the value that they could bring, but they didn't know how to communicate it. So we've had some really great feedback, and hopefully more people can get the benefit.
Boom, boom. All right. Well, thank you so much, Steve, for joining on Nomads. If you were looking for the next episode, we formally launched them on the New Medical Nomads podcast Facebook page. If you want the early access to these episodes, definitely check out on YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes, or any of your favorite podcast apps. We will be there. If not, reach out, let me know, and we'll get it on there. So thanks so much, Steve. Again, for those that are seeing this, if you're on iTunes, reviews absolutely help. If you're seeing this posted somewhere, all the shares, all the likes, all the hearts, winky faces, whichever, all that engagement allows other people to see it, which allows us to help more and more people, which is the whole point of the show. So thank you so much for joining, Steve. You've been there for me. Thank you so much again. And for all you nomads, have safe adventures and have safe travels.